Hello, and welcome to the Cattonia Monday live stream with Breach Burke. I am the host of Cattonia Podcast, and thank you for joining me with this. I usually do this every Monday. Now, last week I did not do the live stream. Hello, good afternoon, I guess. Yeah, I mean, for me it's afternoon. We've just hit noon. I did not do this live stream last Monday because I was in New York visiting my guru, and she was, who is Mata Amritananda Mai. She's actually come back to the States to do a tour right around this time, and apparently it was a very last minute thing, because most of us figured after COVID she was not going to come back from India again, but she in fact did. She suddenly made a decision in May that she was coming. And the kind of word on the street about that, at least, I mean, I don't know that this is officially been stated by her ashram, but it seems to be that a lot of the really hardcore divisiveness that we have in the U.S. and, a lot of the hateful attitudes and things seem to be the reason that she just kind of said, nope, I'm coming in, I'm going to, giving whatever that kind of divine feminine energy, she's like, no, I need to come in here and bring it here, because there will be, as with all the programs, sometimes it's the regular people who show up, like myself, and then there's and I'm far from being the person who has been going to see her the longest. I think I met her in 2002, so it's been a while. It's been about I guess 22 years. So, but there have been people who have been following her around since, I think she started doing this in the mid 1980s, is what I think. Yeah, because I forget how old she is now. I want to say she's in her 70s now. I mean, she still looks great. I mean, to me, she doesn't look any different from the last time I saw her, and I thought, okay, she's clearly going to be getting older and older and older, but she just doesn't seem. I mean, she doesn't look like a young person, but she also seems to not really have gotten too much older. So, in any case, she came and gave a very interesting satsang. Now, I do another daily live stream called Morning Coffee with Breach over on Transition Life Coaching, transition.life.coaching, which is my other Instagram feed. So, if people who don't follow that, they can always check that out. Also, I have another channel called Liminal Tarot, where I do tarot readings and stuff, but I also post these morning coffee things there. And sometimes it takes me a couple days to update it, but whatever I've posted to Instagram gets posted over there. So, the reason I mention it is because I do have some live streams where I talk exclusively and entirely about this. So I would refer you over there if you want more detail on the program and what happened and what she said. It was sort of the highlight of it was rather interesting. It was kind of about letting go of the past, not relishing. She kept talking about, because there has been a whole lot lately, a lot of rhetoric around returning to the past. And she literally said the past is a corpse. Stop hanging on to it. It's like it's got to be buried, or she didn't say this, but like bury it, burn it, whatever you're gonna do. But he said, hanging on, kind of like the hanging on to the corpse is not going to bring life back. And hello, good afternoon. It's just really. So it was interesting. So anyway, last Monday I was not here because I was in New York City, and that ended up being an all-day event. Normally, you would receive darshan. I was assuming I was actually going to meet with another professor after that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about in connection with what. That's going to be the next thing I mention here, just as my brief updates before I get into my topic. But I ended up not getting darshan until like 4, and I had a headache all day, and I couldn't quite figure out why, and then I realized at the end of the day, it was like, well, duh. I mean, I had to catch the train really early in the morning, and I left without having coffee, so I get really bad caffeine headaches because I am super addicted to caffeine. So I had this kind of vague fog headache all day while I was there, so I was not really anxious to hang out past having my darshan. And I don't really anyway. My days of really hanging out at those programs are pretty much long over for a lot of reasons. But in any case, I did receive darshan from her, which was quite interesting. And again, those other live streams that I post on my Transition Life Coaching Instagram feed, those are that's where I kind of go into that into detail. Now, speaking of why I was meeting or hoping to meet with a professor friend, didn't work out. I was going to try to catch up with her this week, but I just don't, hopefully before the end of August, I can get back into the city and catch up with her. But I would actually, I had a time last week to speak with the other faculty of what is going to be my school. Now, I think the initial name I had for the school was the Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Feminine Myth. And there was some discussion of that. There's myself and 3 other professors right now, and I don't know if this other woman is going to be a 4th, and I'm thinking of maybe a 5th at some point, but in any case, as of right now, I had a meeting with the initial people who were interested in being involved, and we have actually already set up a curriculum and a semester and a structure, and for how these courses are going to go. And I think, as I've talked about it a little bit before, we're university level educators. Like, everybody who's teaching has a PhD or its equivalent. But it's going to be talking about feminine myth. And I think what the theme is going to be for this first semester, which is going to start in October, and it's going to run till roughly December 22nd. Because it's going to be 4 lectures, but 8 weeks, because it's going to basically be 2 weeks per. So 1 week is going to be the lecture, the next week is going to be like seminar discussion. And then, so there's going to be 4 of those, and then after that, people who are participating and paying for the full semester, like doing the whole course, have a project. Now, the project doesn't have to be an academic paper, it can be. But it can also be a piece of fiction writing, it can be poetry, it can be art, it can be music. I mean, basically the idea is I want people to finish with something creative based on what they've studied in the lectures. It doesn't have to necessarily be about a particular, but it has to be some kind of reinterpretation there based on the theme, and using it, finding whatever creative outlet works for them. Because we do have, of the faculty there actually are people who know things about art, know things about photography, who know things about music, who know literature and poetry. There's the group of us know that. So right now, the 4 that we have are Dr. Joanna Madlock. So anybody who's familiar with Cattonia Conversations, and also the Baba Yaga episode of Cattonia that I did, Joanna and I did that together. That was one of the first ones that I did. It was actually good. And Joanna and I also had one on Slavic creation myths. We actually had a Cattonia conversation. So Joanna is one of them, and she has her PhD from the University of Silesia in Poland. And then there's Dr. Kate Kinsbury, who is, she has her PhD from Oxford, and she's an anthropologist who's an expert in the Santa Muerte and kind of what we call Latin American mythologies and so forth. And then we have Dr. Max Orsini, who is somebody I went to grad school with, who I just know to be a really brilliant and dynamic teacher of poetry and myth, who did his doctoral dissertation on Diane de Prima and Lenore Kandel, who are both the Buddhist poetics of them. And so he also, I know, has something to offer in this genre. And then, of course, there's me, who also has my doctorate, and Max and I both have doctorates from Drew University. Probably the same concentration area, but he did that, and I, of course, did what turned out to be my book, Death and the Maiden. So, so we've all contributing something, and I think as of right now, Kate is going to be doing something on La Llorona, okay? Joanna is going to be doing something on Baba Yaga. Max is going to be looking at the poetics, and I'm not sure if he's doing both or either, but there's Anne Sexton's Transformations, which are her reinterpretations of fairy tales. And also, he was talking about Diane de Prima's Loba, which is another feminine integration, like long-form poem. So he may be doing something on those. And my topic is going to be Hecate and Persephone as being elements of feminine initiation myth, taking more of a psycho-religion standpoint or psycho-myth standpoint, which is, of course, my expertise. So those are going to be the first 4, and then that's going to be, the theme is actually basically reworking of myths. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now, what the name of the school is going to be, people thought that it should be a shorter name. And I think Kate had been suggesting, it basically, well, you know what it is, she kind of had this idea of, you should tie it in with Cattonia. I said, yeah, we already had Scholars of the Borderland, and that did not really take off. I don't want it to be something that has a name like Cattonia U or something like that, because the thing is, people who know what Cattonia is get it. People who don't are going to look at it like, oh, is this some kind of weird witchy Hogwarts thing? Like, you don't. I want people to come out of these with certificates that they can like put on their CV and say, yeah, I've actually have, it's not accredited in an official like university sense, but you have been taught all by expert faculty. You've been taught on this subject, and you walked away with it with something creative. Now, it's not something that's going to be graded. It would be something that would just be, you would get feedback from the appropriate person who has an expertise in that area. Okay, and that's the way that would finish out. So this is the way that this school is going to be structured. At least this is the way we're starting out. I am putting a Kickstarter together for this to try to garner initial costs. And the main costs right now are just paying faculty for their time. They're not in any way being compensated at the same way you would at the university level right now, because we just don't have the money. This would have been something ideally I would have liked to have done entirely for free. But the realities of what it costs, I need to do, is upgrade my Zoom to business, just to be able to have the capabilities to teach for everybody. Not even so much about how many people, but just about that. And I've also got a lot of legal paperwork I have to do in connection with Cattonia LLC, Cattonia.net LLC, really, and all of that. So this is all going to be built in. So basically anything that comes in as tuition is to pay the instructors on the agreed upon basis, and also to just be kept kind of in the kitty to maintain the technology and maintain whatever else. Because if we decide, depending on how it goes, I mean, we could start a semester with 2 students, we could start with 20, we could have 100, we don't know. So whatever it ends up being, we want to be able to dynamically, I don't want to have things so rigid that we can't dynamically move things around. So I have had a lot of experience doing this kind of planning in academia. So, I feel like I'm trying to keep it simple, but I'm also trying to be aware of everything that we need to connect to it realistically. So, and right now, one of the names we're tossing around, or at least the one that I've suggested, is Muses Sanctuary. That's another one that I'm thinking about calling it that. And then just kind of its tagline, School of Feminine Myth. Because I think that's not, it kind of conveys kind of the Cattonia-ish theme. It is the idea of inspiration. It's an educational sanctuary, because it's like, okay, we're getting ourselves away from the rigid university structure that tends to be more corporate and more towards, this is about you getting a job and all this kind of stuff. So, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon or morning or whatever it is where you are. Because we were just talking about the school, and I was just talking about changing the name up to Muses Sanctuary, because I was saying, it's idea of inspiration of different types. We are definitely talking about myth from different cultures, and then of course it's also it's more of a sanctuary for people who kind of want to study the humanities, who have an actual interest in it, in terms of creative inspiration and so forth. So it's not like, I have to be in school and I have to make these grades and meet this requirement. But at the same time, you are working with experts, and you get to walk out with something that is creatively something you've done. So. Yeah, so that's going to be the idea. So that's been where I've been putting a lot of work this month. The next Cattonia podcast is probably going to be on Leviathan. That's going to come out next week. This week, Patreon subscribers, just kind of riffing off the Jezebel one from last week, are going to get a podcast on the Judgment of Paris. Because one of the subjects around Jezebel is that of vanity. And we're basically talking about the idea kind of vanity among these kinds of folkloric or mythical kind of figures. And vanity is a subject that's connected often with the feminine usually in a more pejorative sense, in a more negative sense. So, okay, so the one last little piece of information, people who have been excited about me putting up the original episodes again, I am slowly working my way back through that. The problem that I've had is that, I did manage to pull the audio for the original episodes, but because it was not the original H1N audio I had, which got lost on a drive that was corrupted, I had to pull it from the Camtasia audio, and that got very, very tinny.
So even though I was able to clean up the vocal tics and the things that people hated in it, and when I listened to them, I was like, what was I doing? Like, it just seems like it was so much loud. Like, I feel like that doesn't happen now, even in the raw audio when I record these. But the problem is that the audio is, even after cleaning all that up, is very, very tinny. So Jesse Pollock of 1289 Productions really kindly went through and he totally cleaned up the Lilith episode for me. So that episode is going to come out this week. It's the remastered Lilith. It sounds so much better. He did a really, really great job on it. So definitely a big hat tip to him. He has offered to help me with the audio for the others, but he also told me what software plugins he was using. So I may see if I can play around with those plugins myself, just because I don't want him to have to be responsible for, you mastering. He says, well, I could do a quick job and then you could finish up the editing on your end with the other, just to kind of streamline it. So, so we might do that because he definitely has a lot more expertise as a filmmaker and so forth, dealing with audio, much better than mine. I'm not, I'm kind of an amateur with it, and I've learned a few things over the years of doing this. But so the Lilith episode will be coming back out this week. I also want to do the Night Hag episode, the 2 Hecate episodes. I want to do Medusa, Persephone. Those are going to become some of the initial ones that are coming back out. And I know people have asked for Kali to come back, because I think that was the only one of the Mahavidyas that I had cut. Because I think I cut it I did it by date. I think I had cut off to a certain point. So those I at least want to come back. And then the other ones we can try to fill in, as I have time. So yeah, so that's all the great updates on Chtonia. So the Lilith topic, it's funny, it's almost like everything segues kind of one thing into the next. Okay, so the topic I have today has to do with what I call the dark feminine and the celestial realm. Now, I need to explain where this comes out of, and this also goes back to the other live stream that I do on transition.life.coaching. Like I said, I do a morning coffee with Breege almost every single day, unless I'm not around in the morning for whatever reason. And so people know who follow kind of both streams that one of the things I do over there is a channelings. This has started early this year. I started this channelings of Archangel Azrael, who's also been referred to as the Angel of Death. And this was not something I opted to do. It just kind of happened, or started to happen. And again, on my other website, transitionlifecoaching.net, I actually have a little video, and probably on the other channel, explaining my connection to Azrael and how that came about. So I'm not going to repeat all that here. But this was a topic that I had brought up this morning because this last few days, now again, astrologically, I don't know if this has to do with the Lionsgate that's just been coming up. It seems to be connected very heavily to this full moon that's coming up on the 17th. And there's this Grand Cross, this mutable Grand Cross that's going on right now that is creating potentially. I mean, I'm not a mutable sign. This does sort of affect my Mars in the 12th house a little bit. my natal Mars is at 15 degrees. I think this is at 17 degrees. So there could be a touch of that there. But whatever it is, it just seems like I was getting these things, because what I do is I get the messages kind of in Enochian. Well, they call it something different than Enochian, and I'll explain that in a minute. But everybody knows it as Enochian, okay? So, and those were these are kind of the messages that I get. And initially, I was just kind of getting them and talking about them, and then I was like, you keep a good magical diary. You should be writing this stuff down. So now I have pages and pages in my diary of this Enochian that comes through, and or that we've managed to find a way to communicate, and it's so there's been some interesting things that have come out, and basically the sense is that I don't know what's exactly happening on the 17th, but it does seem like I have some connection to whatever it is, that whatever his main thing is that he's asking, the reason he's asking me to do this, there's something that has to do with me. As I explained in the other live stream, I have a 12th house Saturn as well.
And anybody who knows astrology knows the 12th house Saturn sometimes indicates like being confined in an asylum or something like that. Like there's just something, and I do know that anytime I've tried to do soul work and look into that aspect, it's just like, no, we're not even freaking showing it to you. Like don't look at it. And the implication was, and again, I talked about this on the other one, so I'm not going to go in heavy detail on it here, but basically it was, okay, now we're going to show you. And I'm like, okay, if nobody wanted to show this to me for the last 20 years, why did they want to show it to me now? But anyway, sort of in connection with that conversation, one of the things he keeps talking about is he keeps talking about Lilith, and he keeps talking about the harvest of Lilith. And I'm like, okay, like I said, I'm noting everything down dutifully, but not really entirely sure what it meant. Well, in the last few nights, just between dreams and other just weird channelings, and I do post these to my Liminal Tarot channel as well. Any public channelings I post there. What came up was okay. So he's talking about this thing, and he basically, there was a whole thing about Archangel Metatron. Okay, so those of you, again, who have a familiarity with this, you're going to know who that is. People who do angel work will have heard of Metatron. And he talks about, Metatron, it seems to be connected to what we think of as, a god we think of as Jehovah or Yahweh, or whatever other names. Certainly if you are an observant Jew, you would not use that name, you would use Adonai or something else. Like that's usually the way that it goes. But he had, for some reason, like in this kind of massive dump of information that I've had, he had quite a lot to say about these narratives, and particularly about Metatron. And Metatron, of course, was initially said to be Enoch. Enoch, who wrote what we think of as the Book of Enoch. And the Book of Enoch, for people not familiar with it, it's not a biblical text. I mean, unless you're in the Ethiopian, Catholic Church. I mean, they're the only ones that accept Enoch as part of the canon. Nobody else does. And it's like an apocryphal text that is probably one of the main accounts we have for the idea of the fallen angels. Really, that's something that's not really heavily addressed in the Bible. The idea of, they talk about the fall of Lucifer, but if you look at the real excellent book on this from Scarlet Imprint by Peter Gray, called Lucifer Princeps, he does talk about this somewhat extensively. And as he has pointed out, Lucifer is really, the reference to this morning star that falls has more to do with the title of a king. And maybe it might have been referring to a specific king, but it was more like, I think it was connected to Hadad and to that particular kind of title. But basically, like a lot of the Old Testament, it's very political, and a lot of it has to do with Israel and their victories and their enemies, and and how that's fitting into their narrative with Yahweh / Jehovah. However, again, I think Jehovah is technically the closest way to say that. So, so there's this whole narrative there, and Enoch writes this whole thing. He supposedly has this whole vision where the idea is that the angels have mated with human women. And the Nephilim, that these giants that are referred to in Genesis, around Genesis 5 or 6, somewhere in there, that the Nephilim roam the earth, like these were giants that roam the earth. And that basically the implication is that they were the results of matings between angels and humans. But there's just some very sparse allusions here and there in the Bible. Most of what we have on that comes from apocryphal texts. And certainly Enoch is one of the, is like probably one of the main, that's where we have the idea of egregores or watchers. Although the term egregore in what we're going to call the esoteric world has come to mean something like a tulpa. It's like something where it's like a thought form, something that you that gets created through thought and through intention. That you can create an actual physical being through thought and intention. And that some of these beings that are worshipped, or some of these ones that they may not actually be real,
in the sense of that they represent entities, but because they have become created as something through human thought, consciousness, intent, magical work, manifestation, that they now do actually have a kind of existence. Okay, so what does Azrael say? Well, there was, with respect to the dark feminine, he has said a couple of things. Because again, I do talk more about this on today's morning live stream over on the other. And I don't want to repeat everything I said there. But basically, if I could do the short form, Metatron's not particularly well liked among the angels. In fact, he's probably outright hated. Okay. And the idea was that Metatron was an angel that, again, was a human being who was kind of, brought into the angelic realm, made into an angel. And of course, after you making him into an angel, he says, yeah, that makes him really hard to get rid of because angels don't, they're not mortal. They don't die. Okay. So there's this, so they had Metatron, and what's interesting is that Metatron is talked about in some places as the recording angel. And some people interpret that as that he is kind of the keeper of soul records, or what they think of as the Akashic. And he said, no, he doesn't keep the Akashic. What he does is he writes the narrative that, if you think about the celestial sphere as being like the macrocosm, and this world as being kind of the microcosm, it's like they're the stage director, right? He's writing the script, and we are performing it. Now, somebody told me, I was talking to a friend of mine who was a Rouhani client of mine yesterday, and she said, oh, have you seen Supernatural? And I said, no. And truthfully, I haven't. I don't, that TV back there only streams like Discovery Plus, I think, and whatever I get on Amazon Prime, and whatever, which again, I don't subscribe to anything in particular, and also I watch YouTube on there. I don't like to have a Netflix subscription. I never have. So there's a lot of these shows that I don't have access to. And I know that I was told a little bit about the plot, but nobody had actually connected it to Metatron. And she said, no, the guy, basically there's a point in the series where it's like, okay, all of the angels find out that God, as such, presumably referring to Jehovah, that concept of God, has left, thinking humans don't have any, not going to bother with humans anymore. They're kind of hopeless. And that the script is now being like the guy on the typewriter is actually Metatron. And so, again, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. But then again, I also look at it, like I've talked about Philip K. Dick's Valis as well, where he talks about the idea of the empire has never ended. It's like we're caught in this loop of this particular time period. And again, to a certain degree, we can say, well, that's just fiction. That's just fiction. Oh, that's just a TV show. Oh, that was just some creative idea that they came up with. And yeah, it's just some creative idea. I mean, the context of it is entirely fictional, but sometimes, as we know, and I think this is one of the big arguments for not letting AI do your creativity for you, because it's almost like certain things I think are almost inspired in some way. And if they're not inspired by something that's directly, literally happening, there's certainly some psychological component to it at the very least. Because I found when I think about the themes of a lot of novels that I write, they all seem to be kind of around this idea of like feminine betrayal and stuff like that. Even though, I mean, we all go through life and all have our own stuff that we deal with, right? We all have our breakups, we have our different, stuff that happens. But at the same time, I mean, it's kind of put on a scale that is, sometimes I just kind of think, well, wow, where does a lot of this come from? Because it's not like it's a reflection of my lived life or lived experience. But where does that inspiration come from? So sometimes you will find that there's inspirations there. I think science fiction and speculative fiction sometimes is the most accurate in this regard. It actually it manages to capture certain ideas that later on we go, wow, that turned out to be true, or that resonated. So, I mean, this could be, a case of something like that.
So, okay, so what with regard to the dark feminine, I remember he's mentioned to me more than once this idea of the harvest of Lilith, and he always talks about it in terms of flames and earthquakes. Now, apparently that is not literal. It's not like, oh, we're going to get a bunch of earthquakes. It's like, it has nothing to do with that. It's about causing an earthquake, like causing a shakeup or burning it down, okay? It's more that kind of an energy, and it's talking about it more in the sense of, if I want to put it in the nicest possible terms, like taking the pen away from Metatron, okay, or taking the typewriter or the computer, whatever metaphor you like, because that is the script, he says, that has been driving everything that's been going on. Okay, he says everything that's been going on is driven by this script, and he says the problem is, now this is where we get into, what is the angelic realm like? What is the reality of it? Now, again, according to what I've been told, and I'm sure there's people who are going to want to say, well, that's what you were told. Maybe people are going to dispute. Whatever. This is what I was told. That really the Gnostic conception, which if you read Death and the Maiden, I kind of have some critiques of that just because I feel like it's excessively devaluing of the Catonic in some places. And I did have a Catonia conversation with Dan Hanley about this from January 2021. So that's also on the Catonia YouTube page. And the podcast is available too. But if you want to, now again, Gnostic is one of those terms that covers a lot of different territory. It's not like there was one Gnostic narrative, just like people who think Christianity is like, oh, there's just one Christianity. They just all believed in Jesus and it was all the same. And of course, if you know anything about that history, it's most definitely not the same. You more or less had these two rough factions that were historically that have played out, which were what they called the Orthodox faction and then the Gnostic faction. Okay, and the Gnostic faction was a whole big variety of ways of looking at it. What we think of as the Gnostic Gospels cover everything. There's one, and I can't remember which one it is now, that like literally puts like Heracles in the Garden of Eden. They're all over the map, okay? And again, that particular period of time, which is early Roman Empire, was very syncretic. I mean, you just have to look at the PGM to see that that you have all these different cultures coming together, and oftentimes the beliefs and the gods and everything else, and even in the magical system, start to overlap each other, and they sort of start becoming somewhat unified, even though one might make an argument that they're separate in their own ways. So what Azrael said about the celestial realm is he said, no, everything kind of happens in pairings. So it's kind of like the idea of aeons, okay? The idea that the aeons are pairing. And he basically says that Jehovah is more of the concept of the demiurge, or Yaldabaoth. He said, yeah, he's got this idea that he's the one that needs to be in charge. And he doesn't really view Yaldabaoth as a deity. He's been made a deity, and the reason being, he said, was because he became involved with this world, and also became the person who became protective of the Israelites as a tribe, made that covenant with them, and really that's what they said initially. It was like he was just like their guy, who was helping them. But around this period of time, that's when you have the shift to all of a sudden he's the God for everybody. And they said that was when the problematic script came in. They said in the angelic realm, this was around the time like they were talking about when Metatron is, becomes an angel. And he says Metatron, basically he comes in like they're the one, because before everything was kind of egalitarian. Yes, there's ranks of angels, there's archangels, and there's seraphim and cherubim. There's different ranks, but nobody looks at each other in terms of rank. It's not like, oh, I outrank you and I tell you what to do, and that there's one guy at the top who's telling everybody what to do. Like, that's not how it works, he said. It's just that there's this balanced pairing. It's masculine, feminine, and he says there are also angels that have no gender whatsoever. He says all of that is part of the conception. He said but basically what happened in short form is he said that when Yaldabaoth became like this kind of almost became like this, like, no, I need to be the leader. I need to be the one to, I'm the one who needs to be in charge here. And then kind of takes Metatron, and Metatron ends up coming in and being put in charge, because I believe he had a lot more power then than maybe he does now. and Metatron became the one who wrote that narrative. And so more or less what they're saying is that this is where the patriarchal narrative comes out of, because they said initially it's not like that. Because I always talk about the angelic realm as being masculine, or I should say the celestial realm. Let's not even just get into angelic. The celestial realm as being masculine, and the earth realm as being feminine. And he said, well, in a certain construct, yes, he says, but really, he says, the celestial realm is both masculine and feminine and should be in balance. The problem is, since this narrative has come in, everything's out of balance. So I don't know yet what exactly is going down here, but it seems like what he's calling Lilith's harvest is basically a kind of a reckoning of this script, and saying, okay, enough of this script, because this script has actually made everything kind of really very lopsided. So there's a whole thing about that. Now, with regard to the Lilith narrative, okay, so what do we see? Now, the one narrative, interestingly, because he was talking about this kind of going down like roughly 1,000 to 1,500 years ago in our terms. And interestingly, about the year like between 700 and 1,000, what we think of as the Common Era, or AD, or whatever, was an apocryphal text called the Alphabet of Sirach. And that is actually the text where we see the Lilith and Samael story. The idea that Lilith is the first wife of Adam. Now, yes, there's supposed to be some Talmudic references and other things as well, but the idea that she's the first wife of Adam, and because she is, he wants to be like, it's a whole sex position thing. Like, he wants to be the guy on top, and she is just like, why should you be on top? Like, we're made from the same thing. Why do you get to be over me? And when she goes to Yahweh, however you want to conceive of Yahweh, he says, well, yeah, he really should be over you. And she's like, well, the both of you. And she leaves. And supposedly she runs off with Samael. Samael, supposedly the serpent that, messes with Adam and Eve. Although in the Gnostic conception, the serpent is actually Sophia, come into the garden to try to rectify this imbalanced error. And actually Christ is also supposed to be like that Sophia, that serpent wisdom that's come back again in that particular conception. And he did say, he says Jesus has been kind of thrown under the bus a lot. He says Jesus is actually fine. He said this, but what happened, he says, is when that narrative changed, Jesus kind of got co-opted as kind of the figure of this other narrative. But that's not actually the narrative of Jesus. That's not. And truthfully, if you really read the Bible, it's, probably not. But it's interesting how many people don't read the Bible and kind of just ignore it. Or they read it they want to read it in a certain context, in a certain light. So, so it's really quite interesting. And so Lilith and Samael are considered to be like this evil couple, right? This kind of demonic couple that is just there to ruin creation in this Alphabet of Ben Sirach. Now, the thing is, that the problem with the Alphabet of Sirach is that it's actually, some people now, some Jewish scholars actually think it's an anti-Semitic text. Like, there's something about it that actually seems like it's either parodying or lampooning, certain things about Jewish belief. So there's a lot of people who find it a very offensive text. But this is where we have this story. Now, if you get involved in Kabbalah, okay. Now, and again, this is more 20th century stuff. I don't think this is part of traditional Kabbalah, but you have the idea of the Klipot. You have this idea of the tree of death, which is the reverse of the tree of life. Okay? And Lilith often falls on that tree of death in the Sephirah of Malkut, or usually where the Shekinah is. But she's like the reverse of the Shekinah. She's supposed to be on the tree of death in the Sephirah of Malkut, whereas Samael occupies Hod, which is the realm of Mercury, which is... both of these are still in kind of the manifest world, as opposed to what's above Tiferet, which is unmanifest, or just, depending on which way you're going on the tree, it's either coming into manifestation or going out. And now, Klipot is actually a term that has to do with shells. It's basically the idea of husks or shells.
So the Klipot is a tree of death. It's like the place where supposedly there's no life, there's no soul, it's just like, dead. And the weird part is it's that no, actually, these are the where you have death is where you actually, in order to have life, you have to have death. These are the representations of the soul. This is not, they said it may actually be kind of the reverse of what you're thinking here. Because it's actually, these are the elements that are connected with life and bringing life and making people conscious of what it means to be alive, conscious of their own soul. Whereas the other version, there's this idea that you need to abandon your soul in terms of this idea of spirit that really has to do with something that may be unmanifest, and it is not about living in the world at all. So this is kind of an interesting retake of the whole story. According to him, Archangel Samael, he says, Samael does roam the earth, but not because he's been banished anywhere. And he says the whole narrative of the fallen angels is BS. He said nobody's fallen, nobody's done anything like that. That's nonsense. He said when you talk about beings that are demonic, now as opposed to daemonic, which are basically any kind of intermediary spirit, is a daemon, which is a Greek term. But the term demon comes from that. But a demon, if we think about it in terms of this war between the celestial realm and the Chthonic realm, which is the way a lot of times it's been construed, he said, no, it's actually just a war within the celestial realm between those who want to kind of rigidly impose a certain structure that disenfranchises one whole half of the system. And he says there's fighting back against that. But he says the way that gets played out in that realm, it almost gets reflected back into this realm. And so we have these kinds of collective narratives in this realm about, because right now it seems, and again, we're not just talking about the United States here, we're also seeing this in other countries, although we are starting to see this kind of push the other way. There's been a lot of push to the very hard right in a lot of places. I mean, I even see this in esoteric groups too. There's this really hard right push that says, no, you need a strong leader, you need a strong man, you all need to be afraid, everything is terrible, everything's going to crap, the whole world's gonna fall apart. That's the narrative that they're pushing back against. Now, whenever I get, if you watch any of the Azrael channelings that I do, and I said they're channelings, they're not me making crap up. I mean, this is just what comes, I just say what comes through. And he repeatedly says a number of things. One is that there are no messiahs. He said, you're not, anybody who portrays themselves as a messiah, there are no messiahs, he says, and we're not tolerating any new messiahs. Okay? And it kind of might call into question even the old one, right? But there's no new messiahs. That's one thing. The other thing he continually will say when I do these things is he says, you need to stop being afraid. And he's not talking about me personally. He's talking about stop being afraid. Stop being afraid. I've talked about how I'm doing this Rouhani healing, and I said, yeah, this just seems kind of weird given my whole dark feminine bent that I'm doing something about opening the heart and love. But he's like, no, that's actually the right thing, because it's when you open up, that vulnerability is actually really, really strong. Because it says, I'm optimistic and I love life and I have a wonder of life and I'm in the world and I'm being authentic and I'm enjoying it. I'm not living in this space where I hate everybody and I'm afraid and I'm scared and I'm anxious all the time. It's no, he's we're trying to move you into a space where you actually enjoy this world for what it is, where you allow your soul to really shine and not have this idea that, that everything has to be, if you go outside the little structure of the box that I think I compared it on the other live stream to that South Park episode. I don't know if you ever saw that one where they're all on the bus coming home from school and they're driving across a mountain thing, and then the bus nearly falls off the edge. So she's kind of there, and then she's trying to figure out what to do with the kids. She's got to kind of leave and go get help. So she has her little videotape in there of what to do in the event that the bus, and then it was just kind of tell the kids there's a big scary monster outside. And if they leave the bus, they're going to get eaten by the big scary monster. And it's that kind of a thing. And of course, on the episode, I think, and I forget which character it was, but he's the one wearing his little Star Trek uniform, and he's like, I'm going to go outside. So he goes out of the bus, and he's walking, and he waves to everybody, and they're like, hey, he's okay. And then all of a sudden, the big scary monster comes and eats him. But it's just kind of, it's kind of funny, because that's kind of the thing, though. It's the big scary monster narrative. It's just kind of like, if you go outside this, if you don't do things and follow our structure exactly as we said, the big scary monster is going to go get you. And a lot of people, I think, follow certain religious systems because they're afraid of the big scary monster. They think, and of course they're taught that the big scary monster always seems to be construed as some kind of a monstrous feminine, which is one of the things we talk about. And my question has always been, why? Now, you can argue about whether or not this answers the question, but it was certainly bizarre to me, because this is not something like, if I had thought about it on my own, this is not something I would have come up with. Although it's not, when I do sit down and think about it, it's not that it doesn't exactly make sense either. But again, I've never been kind of fans of that Gnostic worldview, but this seems to be implying that, no, actually there is something to that. Like, that's not incorrect. And, but again, there's this idea of moving back into kind of like getting those two things in harmony. That's why there's a lot of people talking, and it's not just me. I mean, I of course have a podcast of the dark feminine, right? But it's not just about the dark feminine. It's about, or the reason that the dark feminine is coming up, because it's kind of like, it's like he's saying, it's like, that's what he's calling Lilith's harvest. He's like, there's like this earthquake that's going to come in because the balance is out, and it's almost like that shakeup has to happen to put things back in balance. Something akin to what we see in Hindu mythology, when we see the Durga mythology, where Durga or Lalita, or where you basically have that narrative of a being that is very spiritual but gains a power that they then decide they're going to try to control everybody else, which is kind of in a sense what's going on here, and that they're going to be the ones who's the controller, and then the gods have to go call upon the Devi, or the goddess in her form, who is unmanifest, by the way. And interestingly, that was another thing Azrael said, because I said to him, well, my understanding of the hierarchy of angels is that, what we think of as God, whatever term you want to use to describe God, oftentimes it's one of the Hebrew terms, that's who they answer to. He says, no, it's not. We don't. That's not who we answer to. He says the actual reality is unmanifest. But he doesn't think about it as a masculine plemora either. He says if you're going to get gendered, he said it is feminine. He says, but that energy is unmanifest. So it's kind of like everything just kind of emanates and just does its thing. But when there's an imbalance, he says that's when people go back to that source, and that's when the source comes in and sets things right to balance again. Which is what the Hindu myths talk about, exactly. And they're construed of as Shaktis, they're feminine warrior energies that come in and battle against these forces that throw things out of balance. I believe they're actually, like in the Durga Saptashari, they talk about Shumba Nishumba, too much and too little, is really what those mean. And those are the main generals of the Mahisashura, the great ego, the one who is deluded into thinking that they're the only ones. It's kind of interesting where you kind of see the parallels. I mean, again, I'm not suggesting from a academic standpoint that these are the same thing or whatever, but it's very curious how this fits in with what this kind of channel dump has been that I've gotten in the last few weeks. So, or really the last week. It feels like a few weeks. It's been very, very strange. Like, it's literally like I've been just woken up every night with this stuff, and I'm just like, what is this, And then there's certain aspects of it that relate to the stuff that I do, and I've kind of felt like, well, that's something I'm just going to keep to myself, because I don't think that's part of what needs. But he's just basically saying, like, yeah, just tell it like it is. That's a narrative that's dead. And this is why he says you're seeing like religions like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, like they're not having the prominence that they used to have. They said because people aren't buying that narrative anymore. And this hard push to the right, now there's kind of a push back. We're seeing a push in the other direction
where people are like, no, we don't really want to accept a narrative where we have to be afraid and everything sucks. You know, we want a narrative where we're joyful and hopeful and we want to be alive, and that's really, it's like the soul is pushing back. So it's not like about particular individuals. It's kind of like a collective thing. Like, no, we're rewriting the story here and we're pushing back. And I think to a certain degree, I kind of almost felt like that was why they wanted me to finish some of my fiction, because sometimes I always felt like that. Like, yeah, and I'm thinking like, well, what's so important about this? I mean, I do other stuff that I think probably is more important than that. But they're like, no, that's there because it's a narrative that we're getting out about that's trying to change the narrative that exists. And I don't know, the thing is kind of mind-blowing to me, because I'm like, I've always kind of felt that my work is about helping to change the narrative. And we talk about this in a psych of myth level, psychology of myth level, which is certainly the academic perspective that I take. But this is almost like saying, no, like this is almost happening on a macrocosmic level as well. And the other thing that he had mentioned to me was, he said, yeah, there tends to be, and this is where we also get into that Yaldabaoth mythology, is that there's too much of a focus on the earth, like the terrestrial world. Like that's the only thing that exists. And that's the only thing where we're interested. He says, but there's a bigger system. It's a big universe, and it's not just you guys. Like there's a lot out there. One of the things I had mentioned this morning was the fact that I was thinking back to, I think it was Psalm 81. I can't remember. I always get it mixed up whether it's 81 or 83. But in any case, if you look up in that area, you'll find it. It's the one where they say the Lord sits among the council of, and then it's Elohim, which are the gods. Because that was the direct message I got this morning. He says, more or less, I'm not an effing son of God. That's what he said. We're not sons of God. Stop calling us sons of God. That's literally the message I got this morning. I was like, okay, first of all, I didn't start calling you that. But second of all, that was just kind of the idea there, was that the angels are not sons of God. And because Elohim is probably, okay, you have the Canaanite deity El, which is probably what the model for Yahweh is, or Jehovah. It's probably the model for that deity, because a lot of people were trying to say that, like, well, Yahweh is kind of like another version of Baal, but it's like maybe some aspects, but they said El was more like the deity who kind of sits in a tent, like apart from everybody else, so he's very transcendent. And a lot of times if you read, like if you go to the Interpreter's Bible and you look at the translations, or some of the, what I've been told are some of the better translations from the Hebrew of the Bible, you will see they will say, that they were in the company of El. Instead of saying the Lord, they will say El, El, El. And like I said, El is a Canaanite deity. But the idea is that he sits in the council of the gods, and what he does in this psalm is he basically says, you don't do enough for the people of earth. I do all this stuff for them, so they're going to forget you, and you're going to remember me. So it's interesting, because I know what I argue is kind of like, he's saying Elohim, which is the word for gods. So it's almost like he's sitting with other gods and saying, yeah, they're going to forget about you and just pay attention to me. And that is one sense of looking at it. But another sense, some people say, well, no, maybe he is actually referring to the angels there, or these, because really he said it's more like the aeonic pairings. It's more like the aeon pairings that Gnosticism talks about. Like, you're all not going to be remembered. The focus is just going to be on me. So it's almost like the psalm talks about that actually happening. I was like, well, that's also, again, these are just different ways of thinking about stuff that certainly in my own research, I certainly looked at very differently in the past. So I think if there's anything that we're saying about the celestial realm here, certainly from a Jungian perspective, you read Erich Neumann, he says that for whatever reason, the heavens are perceived as masculine and the earth as feminine. And this isn't just something limited to Christianity or to that kind of thinking. You do see it in, Varro talks about it in his own his own grammar. Like, kind of like, well, it is well known that things of the earth are feminine and things of the sky are masculine. Like, it's not something that's limited to that kind of Christian environment. But he's saying, well, no, the reality is that the celestial realm, or the angelic realm as such, is both. it's masculine, feminine, and I guess you could say dual sexed or no sexed. It's all of it. But it's kind of in balance, and then it kind of just flows. It emanates into creations. He says, but here the problem with the way that we look at things here is we look at things as very separate. It's a dualistic way of thinking. And it did actually also get me thinking, and I was kind of questioning it this morning, some of the other apocryphal texts that were written by the Essenes and so forth that talk about this cosmic battle of good and evil. And I'm like, I almost feel like I'm like, because the Essenes were the ones who were out in the desert and were probably the more mystical variety of Judaism at that time, although I think they were also very orthodox about how they practiced Judaism. And it was just kind of like, yeah, there's this epic battle going on. And it's just kind of like, that's interesting. But we've come to conceive of that battle as the evil side happening on Earth. But that's because, in a way, that it's construed of as whatever the feminine side of that is somehow inferior. And that it is not to be... it's not to be respected for the qualities that it has. That they just have to submit to the rules and the structure of the male hierarchy, because those are the ones who really know what to do. Like all of these, because it's that privileging of consciousness. And honestly, he said that the fact that we have a consciousness does actually make a difference, because people, the deities that you focus on, the angels that you focus on, or the whatever, they when people do magic or they do prayers or they do whatever they're doing, that excessive focus will add energy to that particular being or concept or whatever, whoever's petitioned. But also, if it's something that doesn't exist, it can actually create something that doesn't exist. So it's interesting. And he more or less implied that Lilith is not really, is probably more of an egregoric type being, because he sees more of the Lilith myth as kind of a metaphor for this falling out of the feminine, because apparently there was some feminine rebellion at this time, and that those feminine angelic beings or elements came to Earth and refused to come back, which is literally what happens in the alphabet of Sirach. It's literally where they try to get Lilith to come back, and she's just like, no, I'm not coming back. So, so they said that it's really more of a reflection of that, but it demonizes Lilith. And the word Lilith is used because it tends to refer to screech owl or night hag. Maybe it be connected to the idea of Lilitu, which is, again, in Babylonian conception, that also has its own kind of connotation there as well. So, just really interesting kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know. My whole thing is just, this is what I'm getting, so I'm saying it. Some people may say, yeah, that resonates. Other people might be like, oh, I don't know. That's what I've said. I'm kind of at a point where it's like, whether people accept it or think it's rubbish, it's just, that's what I'm getting. And it is kind of making me think about this stuff in a new way. So whether you want to take it as what it is, or if you say, well, I can't accept the ideas of channelings and stuff, then okay, well then nonetheless might want to look at it as a different type of academic exercise at the very least, because it's kind of like, because it does have to do very fundamentally with shifting narratives. And it's interesting that this is coming in as, pushing back against a narrative that they're associating with Metatron, who they say, because first of all, they don't like him because they said the Book of Enoch is a lie, and they feel like it's slander, I guess. And secondly, that Enoch as Metatron doesn't have any business being over angels, because he doesn't really understand how the whole system works. He just knows what the other guy told him is how it works. And so that was kind of it. But Metatron also, he has said, does not hold the position that people think that he does. At one time he did, but does not. So people who are looking to Metatron for like sacred geometry, he's like, don't look there. That's not where it is. Don't look there. So that was interesting, because again, this is not anything that I think about really. But it's kind of what's come up. So that's not kind of, it is what's come up. So I don't know. You can. It's food for thought, something to chew on, certainly. And again, for some people,
it will resonate. For other people, it won't. And my whole bottom line is, look, whoever needs to know that is going to know it. So that's kind of the way I'm leaving it. I'm not really bothered about trying to make people believe that or anything else. And I'm not suggesting that I'm any kind of, like, I don't know, prophet of anything or anything like that. It's just, this is what I'm getting, and I've been saying, like, getting kind of message of, yeah, you should share this. So I'm like, okay, I have a forum, I'm sharing it. So, obviously, if you have any thoughts on it, you can let me know. But that's kind of what it is, and that's what I'm getting. So, and that's kind of the main thing on my mind. So I didn't really, and it does kind of connect in with the whole Lilith idea. But the idea of Lilith is kind of just being a female aspect that rebels against this particular narrative. So in a certain sense, that makes a lot, not just me, but a lot of people who kind of actively seek to get people to understand that aspect of the feminine as having that kind of Lilith aspect. That it is maybe not liked or appreciated by that, but this is what it is. So anyway, we're at 1 hour. I want to thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you found this interesting. Like I said, people can feel free to comment to me. They can also DM me about things or email if there's any discussion that people have. I have been getting on the other channel, people have been DMing me because they've been having similar thoughts, experiences, whatever. So they've kind of been like, ooh, well, yeah, like this is what I got. Yeah, so people are kind of comparing notes on that. So, but yeah, it's just, it's what I'm putting out there. And, I don't, as a friend of mine said yesterday, they said, well, I don't think you're done getting this kind of information. It sounds like this is just still ongoing. And I'm like, yeah, it probably will be. So, like I said, whether I share that here, whether I share it over there, it's going to depend on how relevant it is. But I felt like some of the topics that came up in that were relevant to this channel and relevant to the theme of Chtonia. So I felt like it should be shared here. So anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. I will be back next week, and maybe, let's see, next week, like I said, if I'm doing Leviathan, I may end up doing a live stream that kind of complements that, or maybe talks a little bit more about these idea of dragons or water monsters or these kinds of things as being construed as part of this feminine and in this way. So we may talk a little bit more about that. Have a great rest of your week. And like I said, this podcast, if you're a Patreon subscriber, there's a podcast coming out. And we'll look out for a Kickstarter with relationship to this school that right now I'm calling Muse's Sanctuary, unless I get any pushback from the other faculty. And I talk about that at the beginning of this live stream. So if you missed it, you can go back and just catch the very beginning of this once I post it, and you'll get the details on that. But it is going to be a academic school of feminine myth, which I think a lot of people seem to want, and it's going to be kind of outside the context of regular academia, but still allowing people to explore creative ideas connected to myth and, reworking myth. So, okay, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next Monday. Take care.